When you buy a luxury sports vehicle, you're making a statement about yourself. You're telling the world that you have so much money that you can afford to buy a vehicle to treat more like a plaything than a means of getting from one place to the next. At the top of the range, sports vehicles cost more than the houses some of us live in. That makes it almost unthinkable that such an expensive purchase would ever be abandoned. But that's the fate that's befallen every vehicle in this video. Watch in horror as we tell you all about the most incredible abandoned super sport vehicles in the world. Formula One racing cars are about as expensive as motor vehicles get. Each one costs millions of dollars, and millions more go into maintaining, modifying, and developing them after they're built. After the end of each season, they're retired and replaced by a brand new car to race on the world-famous circuits of the competition the next year. Where do the old unwanted cars go after that? Well, apparently some of them end up abandoned in France. It's thought that this collection was bought up by a wealthy investor. But then something happened that led to them being forgotten and then left to rot away. In among the group is a 1990s Benetton of the kind driven by the legendary Michael Schumacher. But there are also priceless Ferrari and Benetton cars here too. Some people have claimed that they're imitation cars rather than the real thing. But if that's true, they're the best looking imitations that we've ever seen. And they still deserve to be looked after better than this. The Honda NXS was a trailblazing vehicle when it was introduced back in the 1990s. It was the first luxury car in the world to have every part of the suspension, bodywork, and chassis all made from aluminum. The popular vehicle stayed on Honda's production line all the way through until 2005, so it's not exceptionally rare. But it is rare to find one abandoned and apparently uncared for. This Honda turned up in the middle of a forest in St. Petersburg and was found by chance by mushroom pickers who were out performing their daily duties. From its condition, it was apparent that the abandonment wasn't recent, because it was covered in moss. Strangely, whoever parked it here also seems to have taken the engine out as they left. The history of the car was traced back on its chassis number, which revealed it had been imported to Russia from Germany, but the car's owner couldn't be located. With nobody else coming to claim it, a custom car company has taken ownership and have started the process of restoring it to roadworthy condition. Classic car traders all dream of stumbling across the perfect barn find, by which we mean a classic and desirable car that has been parked in someone's barn or garage for decades and forgotten about. They happen very rarely, but every now and then somebody will strike lucky. Finding a 1969 Dodge Daytona Charger is about as lucky as you can get, but the real kicker of this story is that it wasn't even the vehicle that the person who took these pictures had gone to look at. Trader Charlie Lyons had gone to inspect the owner's 1970 Chevelle when he casually mentioned the unwanted Charger, and naturally Charlie was immediately excited. It came to be abandoned because a circuit judge bought it as an everyday car for his wife many years ago, but hadn't factored in the incredible cost of keeping the vehicle fueled. It therefore stayed in a barn until 2015 and became a temporary home to a family of mice. Charlie paid more than $100,000 for his lucky find and plans to restore it himself before selling it on. There's a lot of mystery surrounding this $250,000 Ferrari 488 GTB, which was found abandoned in a field in Huddersfield, England, after apparently coming off the road and crashing through a fence. The damage from the crash isn't terrible, but it appears that the driver fled the scene rather than alerting the authorities and phoning a haulage or repair firm. Nobody would abandon a Ferrari like this in normal circumstances, and so police believe that the driver was either drunk, had stolen the car, or was otherwise driving illegally. Just to make things stranger, even though the license plates were still attached to the car, no owner could be found. The impact damage to the right-hand side of the vehicle, which includes a deep gouge that left the wing mirror hanging off, might even suggest that it came into contact with another car, and yet no crash was reported, and no other vehicle was found at the scene. We'll probably never know what happened, but we do know someone has now lost a very expensive supercar forever. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is a man who knows a thing or two about crashed and wrecked cars. the legendary NASCAR driver, has been responsible for many of them during his career. There's no doubt that Dale loves the cars he drives, though. So much so that he often takes personal ownership of them when they're too badly damaged to go back out onto the track. Earnhardt has a whole graveyard of wrecked racing cars, which he's created and cultivated himself, including suspending one of them between two trees, as if it had implanted itself there after flying off the track. The official name of his graveyard is Dirty Mo Acres, and it's the final resting place of many of the cars that have been driven to destruction by either Dale or one of his racing friends. Number 10, Wonder Woman, which was wrecked by Danica Patrick during the Go Bowling 500 in May 2017, is one of the more recent additions. The unusual museum is currently off-limits to the public. We hope Dale changes his mind about that in the future. Dubai is one of the wealthiest and most opulent places on Earth. And so if there's anywhere on the planet that a car owner can thoughtlessly abandon a supercar without worrying about the cost, it's there. It happens so regularly that around 2,500 sports cars are left in Dubai's desert every year. But the reasons for their abandonment are more complicated than people probably imagine. The desert is currently home to a whole series of Lamborghinis, Bentleys, Porsches, Honda NSX, and even a $1 million Ferrari Enzo. But the most likely reason for them to be left in this way is that owners have defaulted on loan payments. The falling price of oil in the region means a lot of people there aren't as rich as they used to be, and so they've cut their losses and gone home, leaving their unpaid purchases behind. Non-payment of debt is a criminal offense in the United Arab Emirates, and the prison system is notoriously harsh, so in many cases it's preferable to dump your assets and run, rather than waiting for the police to pick you up. The only thing better than finding one rare and valuable car in a barn is finding several of them at the same time, which is precisely what happened in France earlier this year. The collection was put together by a rich sports car enthusiast who was unable to continue caring for them when he developed ill health in his later years, and they eventually became abandoned when he passed away without a will or an heir. That left all of the dusty relics heading for auction, where their buyers will likely have to spend a little extra money on refurbishing and restoring them once they've completed their purchases. The star of the old man's range is a beautiful old Lamborghini Miura, but there's also an early model of a Porsche 356, which was also found parked right next to an E-Type coupe, both of them covered in dirt and spider's webs from years of inactivity. Moving further along, the barn find team also found an L-82 Corvette with its keys still in the ignition, a Lincoln Continental convertible, and a prototype Hotchkiss Gregor. Cars aren't the only kind of luxury sports vehicles in the world. If you really want to show off to your friends and neighbors, and you live near a body of water, you might also consider purchasing a speedboat. Perhaps you might even buy a boat that looks exactly like this 18-foot Donzi speedboat. If you do, we hope you treat it better than its owners did. It was found floating abandoned in Boynton Beach, Florida in 2011. A few of the items found on board gave police officers a clue as to what it had been used for. There was a plastic bag full of bread, a gallon of water, and an extra drum of fuel. The police feared it might have been used to smuggle people into America until their dogs sniffed out $20,000 worth of marijuana in a hidden compartment below the steering wheel. Whoever owned and operated the boat was clearly a drug dealer, yet they'd never come back for their boat or the rest of their stash. Perhaps the deal went wrong. The city of Liverpool in England is famed for its history, culture, and its strong sense of identity. It is, after all, the home of the Beatles and one of the world's most famous soccer teams. There are many museums in the city, but there's one that even most of its residents don't know about, and that's the tunnel of abandoned supercars hiding underground. The tunnel was built for a local railway in the late 19th century, but the line was abandoned in 1956. For 20 years after that, it was used as a private car parking garage by wealthy residents. But the tunnel collapsed in 1975 and damaged many of the cars parked inside it. With the collapsed tunnel proving difficult to shift, and the vehicles likely to be written off anyway, the tunnel and its contents were simply abandoned. Determined urban explorers have still managed to gain entry and photograph some of the lost luxury vehicles for us, which include a Lotus 503 Elite, an AMC Pacer, a Mini GT, and a Fiat 103 Coupe. Should any of you ever find yourself sailing around Bermuda, keep an eye out for an abandoned Swan 48 sloop that goes by the name of Wolfhound. It's been a few years now since her crew was forced to abandon her under challenging conditions, but it's theoretically possible she might still be out there somewhere sailing alone. The Irish-owned vessel suffered a total power and engine failure some 70 miles north of Bermuda in 2013. And the rescue ship that answered the crew's distress call only had the capacity to bring them on board. It didn't have means or power to tow the sloop back home. The Wolfhound was abandoned, and it was thought that the crewless ship would sink within days. Instead, it's been spotted twice since, including by a couple who tried to tow her home after finding her 3 months after she was abandoned. The tow rope snapped, and she was left drifting again, by this point 800 miles from Bermuda. We wonder where she ended up. We say that the Wolfhound might still be out there because we know of at least one case where a luxury boat has turned up years after it was lost, and that's the racing yacht Hugo Boss, which once belonged to Alex Thompson. Thompson almost lost his life when the boat suffered a structural fault and capsized during the Velux 5 Oceans race in 2006, but ultimately lived to tell the tale. The ship was thought to have sunk to the bottom of the ocean, but was found abandoned and washed up on a Patagonian beach in 2016, a full 10 years after its abandonment. The IMOCA 60 yacht had been broken into 2 pieces by its crash landing on the shore, but still bore all of its identifying marks. The boat was abandoned just south of South Africa, and so to reach its final resting place, it must have traveled alone for more than 13,000 miles and crossed both the Pacific and Indian Oceans, passing Australia and New Zealand on the way. It will never sail again, but it had quite an epic adventure. You might have heard it said that what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas, and that's definitely true of this McLaren 720 Monocage 2. In this condition, it's never going to drive anywhere ever again. The luxury car, which has a value of more than $300,000, was taking part in a cross-country rally when its driver lost control on a bend and rolled over multiple times, narrowly avoiding what would have been a fatal plunge down a ravine. When police were called to reports of a crash, they found the car abandoned, but later found out that the driver and passenger were both in a local hospital being treated for minor injuries. Amazingly, even though the force of the crash ripped off one of the butterfly doors and severely dented the roof, the occupants were able to walk away from it mostly unharmed. That says a lot about the strength of the carbon fiber that McLaren build their cars with. But even with that build strength, there was sadly no way to salvage this sports car. Cars are beautiful machines that do a very simple thing. They transport us from one place to another faster than we could move on foot. As they were designed for this single purpose, they're not much use to anybody when they're parked in one place doing nothing. That means it's a real shame when you see a proud vehicle which has been left abandoned for years on end and forgotten about, like every car you're about to see in today's video. Where better to start than with the kind of luxury car every motor vehicle enthusiast dreams of, the Alfa Romeo. Staggeringly, someone hadn't abandoned just one, but a whole 5 Alfa Romeos in Belgium. There's a little story behind this one. The place where the cars were found is Kasteel van Heers, which once belonged to a wealthy gentleman. The gentleman fell on hard times and could no longer afford the upkeep of his property or his luxury vehicles. As a result, they lay in an underground car park gathering dust and grime for decades. Only after urban explorers broke into the castle to take photographs were they remembered again, and a rescue project began online. The pride of the collection is a 1960 Alfa Romeo Giulietta Spider Veloce, which has since been lovingly restored to its original shining white condition. Not much is yet known about the fate of the remaining 4, although based on the racing stickers we can see on the side of them, they may have exceptional provenance. Everybody knows that Bugatti make incredible luxury cars, and so if you owned one, you'd probably never get bored of showing it off to people. Buying one and then shoving it into a garage for half a century wouldn't make any sense. And yet, that's what happened to this Bugatti Type 57S Adelante. Only 43 of them were ever made by Bugatti, making them collector's items from the moment they rolled off the production line during the 1930s. The abandoned Bugatti was built in 1937, but spent almost all of its life hidden from the sunlight in a garage in Gosforth, England. By 1955, it was in the hands of a doctor named Harold Carr, an obsessive-compulsive hoarder who was also a recluse. When Carr passed away in 2007 without children or a will, it was left to his nephew to discover the Bugatti when he came to clean out his uncle's possessions. Based on the tax disc, which expired during 1960, it seemed the car hadn't moved in 47 years. The family decided to auction the car, which sold for nearly $4.5 million. If you know anything about this next collection of abandoned cars, be sure to let us know in the comments. You'd be helping to solve a mystery. There's a cave in Wales, known to locals as the Cavern of the Lost Souls. It's 200 feet deep and was once a slate mine. Now it's full of over 100 cars from the 1970s, and nobody knows how they got there. There are cars made by many different manufacturers in various states of decomposition, with those at the bottom of the pile rotting away in pools of stagnant water. Urban explorers have visited the site of the mine, which closed in the 1960s, regularly in recent years to bring us pictures of the abandoned car mountain. Some speculate that all of the cars crashed here after sliding off the dangerous nearby roads in wet conditions, but there's no sign of human remains in any of the vehicles. It seems more likely that all of the cars were deliberately dumped here. Who would do such a thing, and why? One of the most famous abandoned car graveyards in the world used to be in a forest close to Châtillon in Belgium. Photos of the hundreds of cars which were abandoned there were widely circulated on the internet around 7 years ago, and people still turn up with cameras hoping to take their own snaps of the vehicles. All of those people will be disappointed. The cars are gone now, but we still have all these incredible pictures. The urban legend is that the cars were once owned by American soldiers who were stationed in Belgium, but then abandoned them when the time came to go home. That's just a myth though. The reality is that the cars once belonged to a repair shop in the town, which used the forest for storage. When the owner died, the shop closed and there was nobody to care for the cars anymore. There were many American cars here, including a Ford Thunderbird and a Renault Dauphine, but all that's left now is a single Ford Cortina. The town tired of the rusting junk heap and had the cars crushed around 5 years ago. Depending on your historical and political standpoint, the Trabant is either a proud symbol of East Germany or an atrocious car made cheaply by communists. No matter which way you look at them, they were a successful model and sold by the thousands. That was during a time when choices of automobile were limited in East Germany though. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, nobody wanted them anymore, and they started to become abandoned as their owners bought Volkswagens instead. You can still find them in many locations in the East, including an abandoned workshop in Berlin. Here you'll find a prototype of the 1959 AWZ P70 Zwickau gathering dust, alongside a Moskvich 412S and several other more obscure variants of the forgotten brand. It's believed that the cars, like the workshop that acts as their permanent home, have been abandoned ever since the wall fell. With a little hard work, some of them could still be fixed up and driven away, in the unlikely event that anyone in 2019 still wants a Trabant. Are these abandoned cars or are they art? This is Bombay Beach in California, which was once one of the most popular tourist destinations in the whole USA. During the 1950s, you couldn't move for fun seekers and sunbathers. But now it looks like the aftermath of a zombie apocalypse. Flooding in the area got out of control during the 1970s, and when the waters receded, the whole area stank of dead fish baking in the sun. Understandably, nobody wanted to come anymore. Even the residents left town. So why is there a collection of Ford Galaxie's Nash Metropolitans, AMC Pacers, and other classic cars here? Because it's now a modern art installation. The cars are part of a mocked-up drive-in cinema, which broadcasts films onto the side of a truck at some times of the year. Bombay Beach now hosts an annual Bohemian Festival with a post-apocalyptic theme. The cars are still forgotten about for the rest of the year, but it's better than never being remembered at all. You expect to find old things inside a museum, but when a museum gets abandoned, the things inside it can sometimes become lost to time too. It wasn't just the museum which was abandoned in Shaniko, Oregon. The whole settlement is a ghost town. All the cars you'll find here once belonged to an eccentric collector with a passion for 1940s and 1950s automobiles. They've been stuck in Shaniko since the collector died in 2008. If they ever went to auction, classics like the 1956 Chrysler Imperial would be sure to go for big money. There's even a vintage ambulance parked up within the fleet, although it's a long time since it saved anybody's life. The dry heat of the American desert means that the cars have stayed in relatively good condition, and it's believed that they were bought as a complete set around 10 years ago. But mysteriously, they're still here, unguarded, providing excellent photo opportunities for urban explorers. You may have heard the word Aokigahara before in your travels across the internet. If you know it but can't immediately place it, we'll tell you why it sounds familiar in just a moment. While the stories behind many of the abandoned cars in this video are interesting or amusing, this collection of forgotten vehicles is a little gem. Aokigahara is better known to the world as the suicide forest in Japan, where it's thought as many as 100 people each year go to end their lives. That would explain why so many cars are parked close to the forest with no sign of their owners. Some of them end up half buried in snow or lost among the undergrowth. Each of them is a testimony to the life of some poor soul who came to the forest seeking an exit from the world, leaving their car behind them for others to find. As nobody knows what to do with these cars, they'll stay where they are indefinitely. It's impossible not to get chills from looking at them. Although Greece is a republic today, some of our older viewers may remember the days when Greece had a royal family, just as England and many other European countries do today. The royal family of Greece fell during a military coup within the country in 1967, with Constantine II, the last king of Greece, formally declared deposed in 1973. The entire Greek royal family fled to Italy and Rome when the military took over, abandoning the royal palace of Taddeo and all of the luxurious possessions inside it. That included the whole fleet of royal cars, which is quite the thing to behold because they're all still there. As you might expect, the royals didn't travel cheaply. The big Rolls-Royce looks like it was the vehicle of choice, although there's also a carriage designed to be drawn by horses. There's even a large agricultural vehicle for tending to the land. All of the abandoned cars have now been declared national monuments and are protected by the state. While the royal family of Greece may have been caught by surprise by a military uprising, Ferdinand II, the king of the Two Sicilies, had no such intention of being caught in a revolution during the 19th century. He ordered the construction of the Bourbon Tunnel, which is over 1,700 feet of escape tunnels leading away from the royal palace. He had reason to be paranoid. He was briefly deposed in 1848. He didn't live to see it completed, and work was abandoned after he passed away in 1859. The tunnel was then forgotten until the 1930s, when it started being used to impound cars connected to criminal activity, as well as other confiscated electrical goods. When they became full, they were sealed up, but they're now open again as a museum for the public, who can marvel at the forgotten and rotting 1930s cars and motorbikes which line all of the walls below the city of Naples. They're not all in great condition, but the scale of the sense of abandonment down there is almost overwhelming. Times of turmoil in a country will often lead to the abandonment of property, and so it proved to be the case again when Cyprus was divided in 1974, following the Turkish invasion. When that happened, Several thousand people who lived in the affected part of the island just picked up whatever they could and ran away, leaving their cars and motorbikes behind them. Several businesses vanished overnight too, meaning fleets of buses and coaches had no future purpose. Many of the vehicles were left in and around the Akrotiri military base, which has remained a strip of British territory ever since. All of the vintage cars and other vehicles have since been rehoused into the base, resulting in a massive car graveyard. The British aren't holding the cars hostage. They've posted details of the entire collection online and have invited the original owners to come and claim their possessions back if they so wish. Very few people ever have. The cars aren't the only abandoned vehicles here. There's a whole forgotten airport inside the United Nations controlled buffer zone, including a huge abandoned airliner. Vehicles used by emergency services often make use of the latest technology available. When that technology progresses, new vehicles are created, and the old ones become obsolete. Those obsolete vehicles have to go somewhere if they're not to be scrapped or recycled. And it would seem that the French aren't big fans of scrapping or recycling. This vast warehouse of dusty old red fire engines is just one of several which can be found all over France. To walk among them is like experiencing the history of firefighting in the flesh. The oldest of the fire trucks that can be found here are more than 100 years old. The official reason that they are still standing here is that the government plans to open a firefighting museum. But that's been rumored for years, and there's still no sign of it happening. At least somebody is looking after them, and we suppose it means France has plenty of backup support in the event of a gigantic fire breaking out. Most of them can still be driven. Every time we get behind the wheel of a vehicle, it's an invitation for an accident to happen. Most of us don't like to think of it that way, but it's true. Not all accidents are tragedies or disasters, though. Some are just downright bizarre and leave you scratching your head and wondering how they could possibly have happened. This video is full of strange vehicular stories and tales of transport gone wrong. We all know the feeling of driving down a highway behind a fully loaded truck, silently praying that the truck won't brake suddenly or crash and deposit its cargo all over us. Of all the types of cargo we wouldn't want to be covered in, we think this might be one of the worst. In July 2017, a truck containing over 7,000 pounds of wet, slimy, stinking eels lost its load on Highway 101 in Oregon, USA, and slopped it all over the cars behind it. The variety of eels involved in the messy incident were a particularly slimy species known as hagfish. When hagfish become stressed, they emit slime, and unsurprisingly, they found being suddenly dropped into the road extremely stressful. Aside from the heinous smell, the slimy trail created by the overturned truck caused 5 vehicles to collide with each other, although fortunately nobody was hurt. The emergency services managed to get the road reopened within 5 hours, although locals say that the smell persisted for something closer to a week. The eels were bound for South Korea, but obviously didn't make it. We suspect that this was a very expensive mistake from the truck driver's point of view. Having looked at a stinking, disgusting spillage incident, let's check out a more pleasant one. In 2018, a tanker carrying liquid chocolate bound for Warsaw in Poland hit the barrier on a highway close to Ślubka and overturned, spilling its chocolate contents across the tarmac. The cars behind the tanker were able to avoid the wreck, and so they drove through the enormous chocolate pool, taking it with them on their tires. That resulted in a trail of chocolate more than a mile long. The incident happened on a very sunny day, so it didn't take long for the chocolate to solidify on the hot road and stick to the surface. Given that there were 12 tons of the sweet stuff in the tanker, that quickly became a huge problem for the firefighters attempting to deal with the scene. One of them told the local press that dealing with snow was far easier than attempting to clean the chocolate up. They eventually succeeded, by hacking away at it with bulldozers and spraying it with hot, pressurized water. The driver of the tanker was taken to hospital with a broken arm, but he was the only person hurt in the accident. We've done eels and we've done chocolates. So, what's next? Congratulations if you guessed beer! Brace yourself for this one if you're a beer lover. It's not a pretty sight. In July 2017, a truck suffered a catastrophic containment failure and dropped more than 40,000 pounds of Bud Light all over the highway in Durango, Colorado, USA. It's thought that the truck's brakes failed on a mountain road, leading to the truck sliding backward until it struck a barrier and broke open its cargo doors. As party fouls go, this is as big as it gets. It's very lucky that the truck was stopped at all. It flew past the first runaway ramp on its descent and was doing around 60 miles per hour by the time it came to the second. Amazingly, the driver was totally unhurt, but the impact of the hundreds of bottles of alcohol on the road was so violent that some eyewitnesses described it as an instant beer fountain. Again, nobody was hurt, but we bet there were a lot of people missing out on their usual beverage in the state of Colorado that weekend. Planes are incredibly expensive things to build, so any transport mishap involving an aircraft is likely to be a financial disaster. This next incident meets that description. In July 2014, 6 brand new Boeing 737 fuselages were being transported via railway from the Spirit Aerosystems plant in Wichita, USA, to Boeing's assembly plant in Washington State. For unknown reasons, the train derailed as the line passed Clark Fork River on Montana and sent 3 of the fuselages crashing into the water. As each of the fuselages were more than 100 feet long and very heavy, dragging them back up the riverbank without breaking them was not an easy task for the emergency services. It eventually took a crew of more than 50 workers a whole 3 days to get them all out. 19 of the train's carriages came off the rails, and the other 3 fuselages were also thrown off. It didn't land in the water. Also on board the train were fuselage panels and wing parts. Nobody was injured in the freak accident, but it's thought that many of the plane parts were extensively damaged. If you crash your car into a pizza restaurant, and it's going to be a while before the emergency services can arrive to deal with the scene, we suppose there's only one thing to do. That's make the best of a bad situation by ordering a pizza and eating it inside your trapped car. That's the remarkable story of a driver who accidentally smashed his Honda Fit through the front doors of a Valentino's in Lincoln, Nebraska, USA in January 2013. The driver says he intended to visit the Valentino's to order pizza, but his foot got caught on the gas pedal and he smashed straight through the doors. Having found himself inside the building, he decided to proceed with his order anyway. It was very lucky that the incident happened at 11:30 a.m., because it meant that the restaurant was quiet and nobody was in the car's way. Had the crash happened an hour later during the lunchtime rush or after 6 p.m., it's likely that this vehicular misadventure would have had a tragic ending. Firefighters allowed the driver to finish his pizza before attending hospital as a precaution, where he was discharged without the need for treatment. Lee Redmond of Salt Lake City, Utah, USA, was once very proud of her fingernails. She had good reason to be. In 2006, she was listed in the Guinness Book of World Records for having the longest fingernails in the world, at a total length of 27 feet. Sadly for her and for world record enthusiasts, she doesn't have them anymore. In 2009, she crashed her car in her hometown and was thrown from the wreck, landing hard on the road and shattering her nails in the process. Fortunately, her injuries weren't life-threatening, and she went on to make a full recovery. But her nails were gone for good. Lee said at the time that it had taken her 30 years to grow them to their record-setting length, and she might not have another 30 years on the planet to repeat the process. In this case, there was nothing especially noteworthy about the car crash, which was fairly standard as far as 4-car pileups go. But what were the chances of the owner of the world's longest fingernails losing them in such an unexpected manner? It goes without saying that 14-year-olds shouldn't be driving. Even in those few places around the world where a 14-year-old can get a provisional driving license, they shouldn't be behind the wheel of a very powerful car. In the case of our next tale, the 14-year-old driver of this Subaru Forester didn't have a provisional driving license or any permissions of any kind. He'd stolen the vehicle. That's a shocking offense on its own, and the fact that he went on to crash it probably isn't all that surprising. What is surprising, though, is that he managed to crash it into another supercar. The white Subaru Forester was stolen in Perth, Australia in October 2019. Police were in pursuit of the car and were trying to trap it when the young driver stopped, reversed into one of the cop cars, and then tried to accelerate away around a corner. When he did, it went headlong into a parked bright yellow Lamborghini Urus. The Lamborghini was badly damaged in the smash, but the Subaru was a write-off. The only small mercy is that the tearaway teenager was miraculously unhurt. It was a great day for a small village close to Yunnan in China in January 2018 when a truck laden with more than 30 tons of oranges overturned as it passed their settlement on a narrow road. The oranges were inevitably bruised and damaged from their violent meeting with the ground, but that didn't stop villagers rushing to the scene to collect them and take them away by the crate load. Free oranges are a great treat at any time of the year, but especially so in early January in China. The incident occurred only 2 weeks before Chinese New Year. Oranges are traditionally exchanged between friends on house visits at New Year because the fruits are seen as symbols of wealth and prosperity. The more oranges you receive, the better the year you're expected to have. That means the unexpected arrival of a whole 30 tons of oranges in this village was seen as a blessing for the whole population. The only person who wasn't thrilled about the incident was the driver of the truck, who was pictured crying at the side of the road, but it's understood that he didn't lose his job. One of the potential problems that come with owning a house toward the bottom of a road on a steep hill is that it's theoretically possible for a car to come off the hill and land on your roof. It might not be the sort of thing you think about when you buy your home, but it can happen, and here's the proof. In March 2013, the driver of this black Cadillac lost control of his vehicle shortly after pulling out of his driveway, accelerated rapidly, took off from the road, and landed on the roof of a neighbor a few houses down the road. The driver insists that there was a mechanical error of some kind inside the car. Fortunately, he wasn't hurt, and nor was anybody inside the house. If anything, the incident only served to demonstrate the build quality of the roof. Despite having an unexpected vehicle land on it, the roof barely sustained any damage at all. The car wasn't quite so lucky, though, and had to be sent away for extensive repairs. Perhaps the owner of the house should set up a large net in case something like this ever happens again. The scene of this vehicular mishap in Dodge County, Wisconsin, USA, looks like something out of a horror movie. Everything is dark, and there are blood-red smears all over the floor. We're happy to say that this isn't the scene of something gruesome. Instead, it's what happens when thousands of red Skittles, as in the candy, spill out of a box and scatter all over the highway. The truck involved in this incident didn't overturn, it just had the misfortune to be traveling on a very wet night. The rain soaked through the cardboard containers on the back of the truck and eventually destroyed their walls, allowing the cargo to escape. You're probably wondering why all of the Skittles were red. You can't taste the rainbow when there's only one color to taste. The answer is that these Skittles had actually been rejected at the processing stage for being defective. They were on their way to a farm where they'd have been used as cattle feed. You might not have known that cows are fed defective Skittles when you woke up this morning, but you do now. Your first thought upon seeing this picture of a car with a gigantic cactus rammed squarely through the windshield is that the driver of the vehicle must have been killed. Amazingly, that isn't the case. We're not in the habit of bringing you footage of fatal accidents on this channel, so this is actually the story of a miraculous escape. The remarkable incident happened in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, USA in July 2019. The precise details of the incident are unknown, but it's understood that the fact that the Saguaro went clean through the windshield of the Black Infinity is down to the driver hitting the Saguaro, not the Saguaro toppling over onto the car of its own accord. 39-year-old driver Kai Scott had just enough time to see the Saguaro headed his way, so he survived by ducking down below the dashboard. In any normal circumstances, we'd say that it must have been his lucky day, but it wasn't. When emergency services arrived at the scene, they arrested him for criminal damage and driving under the influence. Plenty of people don't like spiders. We understand that. Perhaps you don't like spiders either, and we won't hold that against you so long as you won't allow one to distract you while driving. In October 2015, an acute case of arachnophobia resulted in 11 people being injured in a 4-car pileup. A 17-year-old girl driving through Great Bend, Kansas, USA, freaked out after a spider dropped onto her lap. She took her hands off of the steering wheel in an attempt to get it off of her, and her uncontrolled car drifted across the center line and hit a Jeep. The swerving Jeep hit a minivan, and a 4th car came off the road after its driver's vision was obscured by a shower of debris. 11 people were taken to the hospital in total, but 10 of them were released the same day, and the 11th was allowed out after an overnight stay for observation. 4 of the hospitalized people were passengers in the 17-year-old's car, and will probably have second thoughts about getting in any vehicles she's driving ever again. If you're not mature enough to cope with a spider, you're probably not mature enough to be driving a vehicle either. There are 3 places you generally expect to find a car. That's on the road, in a garage, or parked on a driveway. If the car is brand new, we'd grant an exception for it being in a car showroom. Generally speaking, when a car turns up outside of any of those locations, it's something of a surprise. Some cars and car owners don't like to play by the rules, though, and their vehicles have a habit of turning up in surprising places. Here's a whole video full of incredible and unusual car finds. Ferraris, as everybody knows, are extremely valuable cars. Even in a broken down state, they're still worth money to a collector, so long as it's possible to refurbish them. That means it's very unusual for a prancing horse to be thrown away. So why are so many of them standing in the open and rotting away in a field in the USA? The truth lies in a story that goes from riches to rags. A wealthy American attorney bought himself 13 Ferraris, including a 308, a 328, a 400i, and a Testarossa, using the money he made from his profession. But then he fell ill and lost his job. Without a salary coming in, he could no longer pay for the cars to be stored. And so the owner of the storage facility rolled the beautiful cars out into a field one by one. The attorney eventually passed away. By the time his family took ownership of the vehicles, they were no longer in drivable condition after so many years standing in a field. They've since been sold off one at a time to people who will, hopefully, get them back up and running again. As we already said right at the start of this video, it isn't unusual to see a parked car. But it is unusual to see a parked car on the balcony of a beautiful apartment building. Somehow, this Toyota Yaris has managed to find itself a place to rest 3 stories up the side of this premises in Kiev, Ukraine. How it got there is a total mystery. The balcony isn't motorized, so it can't have been raised up from the floor. It's self-evident that it didn't come through the windows or the door. It might have been winched into position, but it's hard to imagine how such an operation could be performed without the car colliding with the walls or windows. And it's clear from the images that no damage has been done to either the vehicle or the structure. Now it's up there, we have two questions. How much weight is that balcony supposed to be able to cope with? And how on earth is the owner ever going to get it back down again? Forests are largely made up of trees. Cars are mostly made of steel. That ought to make the idea of a car forest impossible. But we know a pair of artists in Nevada, USA, who found a way to make such a thing happen. This is the catchily titled International Car Forest of the Last Church in Goldfield, Nevada. But it doesn't look like any church we've been to. To be honest, it doesn't look much like a forest either. It's actually a rough assembly of broken down, graffiti-tagged cars put together by artists Mark Ripple and Chad Sorg, who started off by burying a single car nose first in the sand of the desert and then started to provide it with companions. There are currently 40 vehicles in the forest, some of which are stacked atop one another, and others buried in the same manner that the first one was. The most impressive and improbable of them is a bus, buried at a seemingly impossible diagonal angle, but somehow managing to remain upright. The artists no longer work together after a creative disagreement, but their creation is still standing, and will likely stay that way for decades. Here's a lesson in never judging a book by its cover. If you walked past Walter Medlin's old barn in Kissimmee, Florida prior to 2004, you wouldn't look at it twice. The old wooden barn was falling to pieces, with bowing walls and rusted posts and gates. You'd never have guessed what the barn was hiding. And nobody did until Hurricane Charlie hit Kissimmee and destroyed the barn. When the roof and walls were ripped away, Medlin's phenomenally valuable collection of antique and rare Ferraris was exposed for all the world to see. Among his multi-million-dollar collection was a 166 Intertouring, a 250 GT85, a 410 Super America, a 275 GTB, a 400 GT, and several more classic prancing horses dating back to the 1950s. There were 27 cars in total, 26 of which were Ferraris, and one of which was a Studebaker Avanti. According to Walter, he hid his vehicles in the ramshackle barn because it's the last place anyone would think to look for them. Miraculously, even though the barn was totally wrecked, the majority of the cars were unharmed. We've already seen a car on a third-floor balcony, and now here's a car that went one better and made it all the way up onto a roof. The amazing incident happened in Glendale, California, USA in March 2013. The owner of the black Cadillac blamed the entire misadventure on his steep driveway and a mechanical failure. He insists that as he turned out of his driveway, the airbags suddenly deployed, obscuring his vision. He immediately lost control of the car, plowed through his neighbor's yard, clipped the edge of another car, and then found himself and his vehicle flying through the air, coming to a crashing halt on the roof. Fortunately for everybody involved, the car landed on a retaining wall, which was strong enough to withstand the impact without the roof collapsing. The roof was barely damaged at all by its unwelcome guest, but the car wasn't quite so lucky. Even if it was still drivable, the owner wouldn't have been permitted to drive it again anyway. This was apparently the second time in 2 years he'd managed to land a vehicle on a neighbor's roof, and so his license was revoked. You're probably getting used to seeing cars climbing buildings now, so let's take a break from that and show you a car that's climbed a tree instead. This white Ford Escort didn't crash into the tree though. It got there with a little help from its owner's angry neighbors. Zbigniew Filo is a young driver of the kind you might call a boy racer, and the noise he made racing his car around at high speed late at night became an irritation to the residents of Lubzynia, Poland in May 2012. After he refused to listen to their polite requests for him to stop, they hired a crane early one morning while the wannabe racing driver was in bed and lifted his car into the tree. The police were called, but they sided with the neighbors and told Zbigniew to pay for a crane to come and get it down himself. The driver accepted his share of the responsibility and promised that he would change his ways in the future, but still complained that he thought he'd been treated a little harshly. You never know what you might find if you go out for a walk in the forest, and for a long time, if you went out walking in the woodland close to the Belgian town of Chatillon, you might have been startled to come across a creepy 70-year-old car graveyard. After so many decades standing exposed to the wind and the rain, all of these cars were long past the point of no return, in terms of being repairable. Nobody really knows how they ended up here in the first place. A popular story told by the locals is that the cars belonged to American soldiers who were stationed in Belgium during the years of the Second World War, but they were denied permission to export their vehicles back home when the war came to an end. With no time to sell them, the entire squadron drove out to the forest, parked the cars up, and walked away. There's also a less interesting rumor that they once belonged to a repair shop that went out of business in the 1960s and abandoned the cars after it closed down. But we prefer the first version of the tale. A little controversy surrounds this next story, which comes from a small village in France. It's either a rotting collection of retired Formula One racing cars, or it's a rotting collection of the best set of Formula One replicas we've ever seen. The owner of the collection insists that it's the former. But either way, it's extraordinary to see such incredible racing machines abandoned to their fate like this. Apparently, the collection was assembled at significant cost by a motor racing superfan, but he was no longer able to care for his unique fleet after losing his job and suffering a steep drop in his income. In 2017, he took to the internet, hoping to find a buyer to take the collection of rarities off his hands. Among the set is a 1995 Benetton that might have been driven by the legendary Michael Schumacher, but there are also cars here from Jordan, Williams, and Lotus, ranging in age from the 1980s to the 1990s. The seller hoped to attract millions of dollars for his collection, but apparently he didn't have any paperwork to support the idea that they are originals rather than copies, so the market was a little cooler than he hoped it might be. Let's stay in France for a moment because we have another astonishing French barn find to show you. This one comes from 2014 when a collection of more than 100 rare and classic cars belonging to Roger Balin was offered for sale. Roger spent much of the 1960s and 1970s putting together his collection of antique cars in the hope that he would one day be able to open a classic car museum. But he suffered a financial setback toward the end of the 1970s and was unable to realize his dream. Even though the whole collection is worth something like $20 million and his financial circumstances were dire, he resisted the urge to part with them, and instead, he left them to his family when he passed away. They made the difficult decision to sell the cars a few years later. With so many cars in the barn, it's impossible to list them all, but the highlights include a Ferrari 250 GT SWB California Spider and a Maserati A6 G2000 Berlinetta, one of only 3 known to exist in the whole world. No luxury car collection is complete without a Bugatti, so it shouldn't surprise anyone to hear that there was a Bugatti 57 Vento in there as well. If your interest in classic cars is limited to American muscle cars, this next discovery might tickle your fancy. Somewhere in this enormous warehouse, underneath this massive pile of discarded junk, there are just over 50 muscle cars hiding from the light. The collection was once the property of muscle car enthusiast Larry Schroll, who spent almost his whole life building up his fleet until he passed away in 2018, leaving them to his family. Even with all the debris and detritus in the barn, Schroll had taken steps to preserve his vehicles under tarps, and so most of them have survived the passing of the years in great condition. He was especially proud of his 1965 Ford Mustang Fastpack, tricked out with disc brakes, power steering, and air conditioning. Back when the car was built, they were considered to be luxuries. His 1954 Chevrolet Corvette, painted in an elusive shade of sportsman red, was also a personal favorite. They're far from the oldest cars in the collection, though. That honor belongs to a 1923 Ford T-Bucket. At the other end of the scale is a 1979 Ford Ranchero GT. It seems like Larry decided that 1980 was the end of the classic car era. In 2014, photographer Piotr Degler set off to Cuba with a mission. He'd heard that somewhere on the island there was a wrecked, abandoned Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, a rare and valuable car that had been forgotten by time and, over the course of the years, turned into something of a landmark. The rumors were true, and Piotr's trip wasn't wasted. He had to search well into the night to find his prey, but when he did, he found it still almost wrapped around the same banana tree that it must have hit decades earlier. The model is considered to be one of the most attractive that Mercedes has ever designed, and it's honestly a little heartbreaking to see it in this kind of state. Finding 1950s cars on the roads of Cuba isn't all that uncommon. But even in that sea of vintage vehicles, this old Gullwing has to be considered a rarity. We can't help but wonder if there's any hope of salvaging it. Most of it still appears to be in situ. We suppose that we should have included one more potential location that you might find a car in at the start of this video, and that's in a museum. Nowhere else would be a more suitable environment for the first ever production Land Rover, but getting to its current berth at the RAC Club in Pall Mall, London wasn't an easy process. For a long time it was considered to have been lost after appearing at a classic car show in 1998, and it didn't reappear until 2017, when a private owner admitted that he'd bought it and taken it out of the world's view. But he was ready to part with it after almost 20 years. The car, also known as JUE 477, rolled off the production line in July 1948, but wasn't registered until 1950 after 2 years of use in the Land Rover development program. Now that it's back in the limelight again, it's going to be very delicately restored, but the restoration work won't involve the removal of any of its original features. As the very first of its kind, the car has value almost beyond measure. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!